Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. I know you guys are all ready to learn more about how your mind works. And today, we're going to be doing exactly that.
Yeah.
So think back to your first day of Psych 101.
Okay.
We're going to be opening up a chapter from a cognitive psychology textbook and just exploring the fascinating world of cognition.
Right, and we're not just skimming the surface here.
Exactly.
We are going deep into the theories, the research, even real-world examples, so you can walk away feeling like you really get these concepts.
Exactly. And the best part is this isn't just about, acing your next exam or anything like that.
Right.
Understanding these concepts can actually change how you learn, how you remember things, how you make decisions.
Absolutely.
It can change how you navigate the world.
You know what's fascinating is we do all this mental work without even realizing it.
Yeah.
It's these cognitive processes that are constantly humming in the background, shaping every experience you have.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What exactly is cognition anyway?
Well, it's more than just thinking.
Okay.
Although thinking is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Cognition is really the umbrella term for all of the mental processes that we engage in.
Got it.
From, perceiving the world around us to solving those complex problems.
So it's like our mental toolkit that we use to make sense of things.
Exactly. And just like any toolkit, it has different components that work together. So think about something as simple as walking into a classroom on the first day.
Okay.
You're already using a whole bunch of cognitive processes.
Let me guess. Just finding my seat involves perception.
You got it.
Okay.
Your eyes are taking in all this visual information, and your brain is instantly processing it, distinguishing between the desks and the chairs, the students, the professors, maybe even spotting your friends in the crowd.
And then comes the struggle to actually, pay attention to the professor.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when there's some, juicy gossip happening a few rows back.
Ah, yes. Attention. The eternal battle.
Yeah, exactly.
Even as you're trying to focus, another part of your working memory is firing on all cylinders.
So it's like a mental juggling act.
It is.
Taking notes, repeating information to yourself, just trying to hold on to it all.
Exactly. But that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay.
There's long-term memory, how we store information for later use,
how
we identify and categorize objects, how we use language, how we make decisions, all part of this incredibly complex system that we call cognition.
And let's not forget about all those times when our memory decides to play tricks on us.
Oh, yeah.
Making us completely blank on a test, even if we studied all night.
Right. Those moments are frustrating.
Yeah.
But they highlight how dynamic memory is.
Okay.
Our memories aren't perfect recordings.
Right.
They're constantly being reconstructed and influenced by our current knowledge, our beliefs, and even our emotions.
So if we're going to understand these complex cognitive processes, it seems like we need a little bit of a history lesson.
Yeah.
Where did the study of cognition even begin?
Well, like a lot of scientific fields, the roots of cognitive psychology can be traced back to philosophy.
Okay.
Thinkers like Aristotle way back in ancient Greece were already fascinated by how our minds connect ideas.
Okay.
What we call now the laws of association.
So like how hearing the word black might make you think of the word white.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Simple example.
Yeah.
But it shows how our minds naturally link concepts together.
Right.
Of course, the scientific study of the mind didn't really take off until the 1800s.
Okay.
When physiology emerged.
Gotcha.
Researchers started treating the body like a machine.
Okay.
And applying scientific methods to understand its workings.
So they were asking questions like, how does information get into our brains?
Exactly.
And how do we make sense of the world around us?
Precisely.
Okay.
And that line of questioning led to the development of psychophysics.
Okay.
Which is the study of how physical stimuli in the world are translated into our subjective experiences.
Okay.
This is where things get really interesting.
I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, consider this. Imagine hearing a finger snap in a quiet room versus hearing that same finger snap at a rock concert.
Oh, yeah.
Same physical intensity, but two completely different experiences, right?
Totally. The context totally changes how we perceive that sound.
Right.
It's not just about the physical stimulus itself.
And that's a perfect illustration of what Hermann von Helmholtz called unconscious inference.
Okay.
Our brains are constantly making judgments about the world based on our past experiences.
Right.
All without us even realizing it.
So like if I bring my phone closer to my face to read a text, the image on my retina is getting bigger?
Right.
But I don't think my phone suddenly grew.
Right.
My brain knows it's just closer.
Exactly. That's unconscious inference in action.
Okay.
Your brain combines the sensory input with your past experiences.
Yeah.
To make the most logical interpretation.
Gotcha.
It's truly remarkable how efficiently this all happens.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
And from what I remember from my intro psych class, There were a few different schools of thought that emerged in those early days, right?
You're right. We had structuralism, led by Wundt and Titchener, who were like mental chemists,
Okay.
trying to break down consciousness into its basic elements.
Okay.
Their main tool was introspection, having people carefully analyze their own thoughts and feelings.
I remember reading about that, but did relying on people's self-reports really work?
Yeah.
It seems pretty subjective.
You've hit on one of the major limitations of introspection.
Yeah.
You know, it's difficult to replicate findings.
Right.
And verify those internal experiences.
Okay.
That's where functionalism, led by William James, offered a different perspective.
Okay.
They were more interested in the purpose of our mental processes.
So instead of focusing on the building blocks of consciousness, they wanted to know what those blocks actually do.
Precisely.
Okay.
They were asking questions like, what is the evolutionary function of anger?
Right.
Or why do we have memories?
Mm-hmm.
This focus on the why of our mental processes has had a huge influence on modern cognitive psychology.
It makes sense that understanding the function of these processes can help us understand how they work.
Right.
But then behaviorism came along and basically told us to forget about consciousness altogether, right?
Well, it wasn't quite that simple, but behaviorism, led by John B. Watson,
Okay.
definitely shifted the focus of psychology.
Okay.
They argued that to be truly scientific, we need to focus on observable behavior,
Okay.
not those messy, subjective mental states.
So no more trying to figure out what's going on inside the black box of the mind.
Right.
It just became all about stimulus and response out.
Exactly.
Okay.
The classic SR psychology.
Okay.
And for a while, behaviorism dominated the field.
Yeah.
But it couldn't explain everything.
Right.
There were some cracks in the foundation, and researchers started finding evidence that learning could occur,
Okay.
even without any outward behavior.
Wait, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
How can you learn something without actually doing anything?
That's exactly what McNamara and his colleague set out to investigate.
Okay.
They used a classic T-maze experiment with rats.
Okay.
Some rats ran the maze themselves, while others were simply pushed through in little carts,
What?
like passengers just going along for the ride.
And picture these little rats in tiny cars cruising through the maze.
Quite the visual.
Yeah.
And what's remarkable is that even the passenger rats, who never actively ran the maze, learned the layout.
Wow.
They weren't just responding to stimuli, they formed a mental representation of the space.
So even without physically navigating the maze, their brains were still mapping it out. That's wild.
Yeah.
But didn't behaviorists believe that reinforcement was essential for learning?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But Tolman and Hanzik conducted a study that challenged that very idea.
Okay.
They let rats explore a maze for days, but with no reward at the end.
And I bet when they finally introduced a reward, those rats suddenly became maze whizzes.
You got it.
Okay.
It's as if they had this latent cognitive map of the maze stored away,
Right.
just waiting to be activated.
Yeah.
This concept of a cognitive map really threw a wrench into behaviorism's emphasis on reinforcement.
Okay, so these studies were starting to poke holes in the behaviorist perspective. But was there a final nail in the coffin, so to speak?
Well, another big challenge came from Carl Lashley,
Okay.
who argued that complex behaviors like playing an instrument
Yeah.
or pulling off a complicated dance move
Okay.
happen way too fast to be explained by simple Esterhate's chain.
There's no way our brains could process all those individual stimuli and responses in a split second.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lashley proposed that there must be internal planning involved,
Okay.
mental processes orchestrating the whole sequence of actions.
So even behaviorists were starting to acknowledge the importance of those internal processes.
Yeah.
But what about language?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't that pose a huge problem for behaviorism?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Noam Chomsky delivered a devastating critique of behaviorism's attempts to explain language.
Okay.
He pointed out that we can generate completely novel sentences, ones we've never heard before, without any reinforcement.
Right. We're not just parrots mimicking what we've heard.
Right.
We're able to create and understand an infinite number of sentences.
Yes.
Even ones that are totally nonsensical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that creative capacity of language just couldn't be explained by simple stimulus-response associations.
Right.
Chomsky argued that we must have some innate mental structures.
Okay.
He called them mental representations
Okay.
that allow us to manipulate language so effortlessly.
So Chomsky's work really started to shift the tide away from behaviorism.
Absolutely. It helped to legitimize the study of mental processes
Okay.
and really set the stage for what we call the cognitive revolution.
So it sounds like behaviorism had its moment in the sun.
Yeah.
But ultimately couldn't fully capture the complexity of human thought.
Right.
What were the driving forces behind this cognitive revolution?
Well, Along with the limitations of behaviorism, new technologies like communication systems and computers started to offer exciting new ways to think about the mind.
Ah, yes, the computer metaphor.
Yeah.
It seems so obvious now to think of our brains as information processing systems.
Right.
But that was a pretty revolutionary idea at the time.
It really was. Think about it. A computer takes in information.
Yeah.
Input processes it according to a set of rules, and then produces an output.
Yeah.
Sounds a lot like what our brains do.
I see the parallels.
Right.
We take in information through our senses, our brain does its thing, and then we respond in some way.
Yeah.
But wasn't there also an analogy to communication systems?
Right. Claude Shannon's work on information theory provided another powerful model. He showed how information can be transmitted through a channel.
Okay.
But there's always the potential for noise or distortion to interfere with the signal.
So kind of like how I'm trying to focus on this conversation, but my brain is also processing all these other sights and sounds around me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our brains are bombarded with sensory information all the time.
Right.
And they have to figure out what's important, what can be safely ignored. It's a constant filtering process.
So by the mid-1950s, cognitive psychology was gaining momentum.
Yeah.
It had the theoretical framework, the research to back it up, and even these cool tech metaphors to inspire new ideas.
Exactly.
But what happened to behaviorism?
Yeah.
Did it just disappear?
Not entirely.
Okay.
It's important to remember that behaviorism made valuable contributions to the field.
Okay.
Its emphasis on observation and measurement is still relevant today.
So those behaviorists weren't completely off base?
No, they weren't. In fact, even cognitive psychologists have to measure behavior to test their theories about mental processes.
Right, because we can't directly observe those mental processes.
Right.
We have to infer them from people's actions and responses.
Exactly. So behaviorism laid an important foundation for scientific rigor in psychology.
Okay.
But the real game changer was the emergence of the information processing approach.
Okay, let's dive into that. What's at the heart of the information processing approach?
Well, one of the key ideas is that humans are symbol manipulators.
Okay.
We take in information from the environment and represent it mentally using symbols, rules, and images.
So our minds are constantly creating these mental representations of the world.
Yes, and just like a computer, our cognitive system is thought to operate in stages.
Okay.
Information flows from one stage to the next, with each stage performing specific operations.
So you might have a stage for perceiving the information, a stage for paying attention to it, a stage for encoding it into memory, and so on.
Exactly.
Okay.
And a crucial assumption is that each of these stages takes time.
Okay.
And we can actually measure how long it takes for a mental process to occur using reaction time experiments.
That's so clever.
Yeah.
By measuring how long it takes someone to respond to a stimulus, we can get clues about how many mental steps are involved.
Right. If a task takes longer, it likely involves more complex mental processing.
Okay.
This focus on mental representations and stages of processing was hugely influential, leading to tons of research in areas like attention memory language and problem solving.
But even with all its success, the computer metaphor isn't perfect, right? Our brains aren't exactly like computers.
That's true.
Yeah.
One of the main limitations is that computers tend to process information serially one step at a time.
But our brains are much more parallel, right?
Yeah.
We're doing a ton of mental work simultaneously.
Exactly, and that's where connectionism comes in.
Okay.
It's a brain-based model that emphasizes the interconnectedness of the brain.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about connectionism.
Well, connectionist models are inspired by neural networks.
Okay.
They propose that our cognitive system is made up of billions of interconnected nodes.
Okay.
Just like the neurons in our brain.
So instead of a central processing unit like a computer, we have these vast networks of nodes working together in parallel.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is that these networks can learn and adapt through experience.
Okay.
The connections between nodes get stronger or weaker based on how often they're activated together.
This is reminding me of that phrase, neurons that fire together, wire together, Hebb's rule.
That's exactly it. Connectionism provides a really elegant way to understand how our brains learn and adapt over time, constantly rewiring themselves based on our experiences.
It's mind-blowing to think about the sheer complexity of our brain.
It is.
And thanks to the field of cognitive neuroscience, we can actually peek inside and see what's happening during all these mental activities.
Cognitive neuroscience is truly revolutionary.
Yeah.
It combines the insights of cognitive psychology with the tools of neuroscience.
Okay.
By using sophisticated brain imaging techniques and clever experiments, researchers can uncover the neural basis of cognition.
So it's not just metaphors and theories anymore. We're actually mapping out the brain regions involved in different mental processes.
We are, but before we jump into all the high-tech brain scans.
Okay.
Let's take a quick tour of the nervous system.
Okay.
The basic unit, of course, is the neuron.
Yeah.
These tiny cells is like electrochemical information processors.
Okay.
Communicating with each other through electrical impulses and chemical messengers.
And these billions of interconnected neurons form incredibly complex networks, forming the basis of everything we think, feel, and do.
Precisely. And when we zoom out from the level of individual neurons,
Okay.
we have the brain itself, the command center.
And the brain is organized into different structures, each with its own specialized function, right?
Right. We have the hindbrain, which handles those essential life functions like breathing and heart rate.
Okay.
Then there's the midbrain involved in movement sensory processing and sleep.
Yeah.
And finally, we have the forebrain,
Okay.
which houses the cerebral cortex,
Okay.
that wrinkly outer layer of the brain.
And the cerebral cortex is where all the higher level thinking happens, right? Things like language memory and decision making.
You got it. The cerebral cortex is divided into two hemispheres, left and right,
Yeah.
each with its own specialized abilities.
And then there's that famous split brain research.
Yes.
By studying patients who had their corpus callosum severed, researchers learned a lot about those hemispheric differences.
Those split brain studies are fascinating. They showed that the left hemisphere is typically dominant for language processing,
Okay.
while the right hemisphere excels at special tasks and visual recognition.
But in a normal brain, the two hemispheres are constantly communicating and working together, right?
Yes, it's an amazing partnership. And let's not forget about the subcortical structures beneath the cortex, like the hippocampus,
Okay.
which is crucial for forming new memories, and the amygdala, which plays a key role in processing emotions.
It's like a whole orchestra of brain structures working together to create this symphony of our minds.
It is.
But how do cognitive neuroscientists actually study all this intricate activity?
Well, they have a whole arsenal of tools,
Right.
each with its strengths and limitations.
This is where things get really high-tech. We're talking brain scans, electrical recordings, even techniques that can temporarily disrupt brain activity.
Right.
Tell me more about those tools.
Well, let's start with EEG and ERPs.
Okay.
These techniques measure the electrical activity of the brain,
Okay.
giving us a glimpse into the timing of cognitive processes.
So we can actually see how the brain responds to different stimuli in real time.
We can, but if we want to pinpoint the location of that activity,
Okay.
we need brain imaging techniques like PET and fMR.
Okay.
They track blood flow in the brain, which tells us which areas are more active during different mental tasks.
Ah, yes, those colorful brain scans you always see in science articles.
Yeah.
But are there other techniques too?
There are MEG measures, the magnetic fields produced by brain activity.
Okay.
And it offers even better temporal resolution than EEG,
Wow.
along with decent spatial resolution.
Okay.
And then there's TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation,
Yeah.
which uses magnetic pulses to temporarily disrupt activity in specific brain regions.
It's like creating a tiny reversible lesion.
It is.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So with all these amazing tools, we must be close to cracking the code of how the brain creates the mind.
Right? Well, we've made incredible progress, but it's important to remember that brain processes are unbelievably complex.
Yeah.
And interconnected.
So those headlines you sometimes see claiming that scientists have found the love center of the brain or this is the creativity area, we should probably take those with a grain of salt.
Definitely, while specific brain regions might be more active during certain tasks,
Okay.
it doesn't mean that those regions are solely responsible for those tasks.
It's more like a network of brain regions working together, right?
Exactly. It's a team effort, and we're still a long way from fully understanding how this incredible organ gives rise to all the richness of human experience.
But even with all the mysteries left to unravel, cognitive neuroscience is clearly pushing the boundaries of our understanding.
Absolutely, and it's even raising some fascinating philosophical questions like, will neuroscience eventually replace psychology altogether?
That's a big question, and one we should definitely explore further.
Right.
But before we get too philosophical, I think it's time to shift gears and talk about how all this research is actually applied in the real world. It really makes you wonder about the future of all this brain research.
It does.
Will we ever have like a complete map of the mind?
Yeah.
With every thought and feeling pinpointed to a specific neuron?
It's a fascinating possibility. Imagine having a neural dictionary.
Right?
That could translate brain activity into conscious experience.
Yeah.
But, the brain is incredibly complex and dynamic.
Yeah.
Our genes, our environment, our experiences,
Right.
they all interact to shape those intricate neural connections.
So even if we could map out every neuron and synapse, would we truly understand what it means to be human?
Yeah.
Would we capture the essence of consciousness?
Those are profound questions, and they're at the heart of a lot of debate right now.
Yeah.
But even if a perfect mind-brain map remains elusive, neuroscience is still giving us invaluable insights into how our minds work.
And the beauty of it is that this research isn't just theoretical.
Right.
it has real-world implications,
And
right?
absolutely. Cognitive psychology isn't confined to the lab.
Yeah,
Applied research takes those principles of cognition
right.
and uses them to address real-world problems, things like improving learning, boosting memory, sharpening decision-making.
So this research can actually help us live better lives.
That's the whole point.
So,
For
yeah.
example, understanding how attention works can help us design more effective educational materials.
Okay.
Knowing the limits of working memory
Yeah.
can help us present information in a way that's easier to process and remember.
It's incredible to think about how understanding something like memory distortion can have a huge impact, like helping juries evaluate eyewitness testimony more critically.
Exactly. Cognitive psychology is a bridge between the lab and real life.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the mind so we can make it work better for us.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the incredible power and complexity of our cognitive processes.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think that all this mental machinery is running in the background every moment of our lives,
It is.
shaping how we experience and interact with the world.
And we're really just scratching the surface.
I know, it's crazy.
There's so much more to discover about the brain and how it creates the mind. The future of cognitive science is brimming with possibility.
One area I find particularly intriguing is embodied cognition.
Okay.
The idea that our thinking isn't just this abstract process happening in our heads,
Right.
but it's deeply intertwined with our bodies and our environment.
It's a fascinating shift in perspective. Embodied cognition challenges that traditional view of the mind as a separate entity,
Yeah.
emphasizing the interconnectedness of our mental and physical experiences.
It makes you think, if our minds are constantly constructing those cognitive maps of our experiences, as Tolman suggested, how can we use that knowledge to become better learners?
Right.
What other hidden cognitive processes are at play in our daily lives?
It's exciting to think about.
It really is. That's the beauty of cognitive psychology. It constantly invites us to explore, to question, to discover the vast potential of our mind.
It does.
Well, that was a deep dive indeed. It was. I hope you've all come away with a deeper appreciation for this fascinating field. And who knows, maybe this is just the beginning of your own journey into the world of cognition,
Maybe.
the world of thinking about thinking.